Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I rise to make my contribution to Budget 2023, I would like to take this opportunity to wish all a Happy New Year. Speaker, before I continue, I would like to, thank the honorable member that just spoke to remind us that our motto is one people, one nation, one destiny. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Speaker, I also want to make a comment on honorable member Ms. Sonia, and when she said that the two major projects that we contribute towards 2023 budget is the Demerara Harbor Bridge and the Gas to Shore project, and when that finished, the budget will go down. I fully agree with her, Mr. Speaker, but I want to remind her that the records, what guarantee do we have that the budget will go down, Mr. Speaker? I want to remind the House, Mr. Speaker, that the fiber optic cable project was a Vitality fund. I want to remind the House, Mr. Speaker, that the specialty hospital was a Vitality fund. I want to remind the House, Mr. Speaker, that the Skelland Sugar Factory was a Vitality fund. I want to remind the House, Mr. Speaker, that the Amelia's Fast project is still there, and they can't get it out of the ground, Mr. Speaker. What guarantee do we have as Guyanese that that budget will come down, or they're not going to be setting another project in line? Mr. Speaker, I want to also congratulate all those hardworking public servants who spend the wee hours in preparing Budget 2023, and the Honorable Minister, Senior Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I thought this budget would have reached $1 trillion this year compared to last year with the number of supplementals we had to approve. But if it did, it wouldn't matter because the people of Guyana is not benefiting directly from this budget, Mr. Speaker. There is no excitement. There is no excitement, Mr. Speaker, of 2023 budget. No excitement. They had to find themselves, Mr. Speaker, promoting a budget. Imagine that. Nevertheless, sir, I would like to turn your attention to the environment and what it means to Guyanese people and what happens in a blink of an eye. Sir, in 2016, thanks to the AP and UFC government that signed the oil deal that now rescue Guyana's economy, making it the 5th fastest growing economy in the world. We have brought this new revenue stream that's now placed in the hands of the PPP, who seems clueless how to spend this revenue. Despite, Mr. Speaker, despite early warnings of the Dutch disease. Mr. Speaker, it is upon us, as mentioned in the budget speech by the Senior Finance Minister. It is real, contrary, sir, contrary to what I heard in the Al Jazeera interview. Many of you know that. The Al Jazeera interview, where efforts were made to redefine the Dutch disease, Mr. Speaker. The guardrails was destroyed, sir, where the PPP this year, in this very House, removed the 22 members oversight committee, comprised of various members of societies that covers the entire spectrum of our country, Mr. Speaker. It was reduced to 5 members committee, where 2 from the opposition were to be selected opposition, but because of the dictatorial approach by the government, they selected who they want, a breach of their own law, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, things will get worse than this Dutch disease. As I look into the budget, I didn't see any major spending for the EPA to build upon what the coalition handed over with respect to its human capacity and infrastructure development. When the coalition government took over in 23 years of destruction to the EPA, it was dysfunctional. It had only 2 vehicles to inspection and monitoring, which meant that no field monitoring and no inspection occurred. No filing system of records to even now to know how many permits and operation existed. Mr. Speaker, unbelievable. The coalition found that the agency did not even have records of numerous operations that there were 600 expired permits over some 15 years. Mr. Speaker, with less than 3 years, the EPA discovered that 2,000 projects existed, brought all permits and operation into compliance, and had 8 brand new vehicles without a dime from the Treasury, Mr. Speaker, without a dime from the Treasury. But funded by the collective of $150 million in fees owed from expired permit and back fees, built a state-of-the-art registry, Mr. Speaker, and filing system to manage these projects, increased staff by 20% with engineers and scientists, which the agency was severely lacking, triple the number of EPA offices from 1 to 3 by adding offices in Quarantine and Linden, Mr. Speaker, to ease the financial burden and inconveniences of businesses people, having to travel to Georgetown only to conduct business. Establish a 24/7 compliance hotline with a 24-hour response time, Mr. Speaker. That is what we have done to the EPA. And develop a culture of transparency, free access to media and public, Mr. Speaker, which is absent today. Mr. Speaker, instead of them building upon the strong foundation which we handed to them, they are now reverted back to the old destructive ways of the PPP. Staff are now being directed to issue permits without inspection, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, most disturbingly, we learned that Exxon files have moved directly to the Executive Director's office. The question is, what is so special about this company, and why has it moved there, sir? What is there to hide, and why is the company being treated differently to even our local businesses, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, capacity building. Mr. Speaker, the EPA had no one with a petroleum background in the oil and gas sector when we took over. In order to quickly build capacity to perform adequate monitoring and oversight of the oil and gas operation, with a $1 million from the IDB, Mr. Speaker, we have got with $1 million from the IDB. We had a World Bank development plan, a plan to build a 36-member oil and gas unit, highly specialized skills and experience for 24/7 on-site presence, Mr. Speaker, on the drill ship and the FPSOs, to obtain credible and real-time information. When the government took office, they abandoned that plan and denied that it ever existed until the plan surfaced in the newspaper and caught them with their pants down, Mr. Speaker. That's right. Forcing the minister to defer question to the EPA directors, whose excuse was that he didn't know the plan existed since he was there. Mr. Speaker, to suggest that this didn't know of such an important and critical World Bank plan existed confirms the incompetency and the incapability to manage this important sector and their continued wasting of the World Bank's money. Even though they caught red-handed about 1 year ago, they still have not done anything to implement the plan to ensure there's a 24/7 on-site presence, Mr. Speaker. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the coalition established a study leave program to build capacity where the EPA was to sponsor students to go to university and train and sign a 4-year contract to serve afterwards. But all these were abandoned, Mr. Speaker, abandoned. They told those students who had already applied to university and prepared to go that the program was abandoned and they are on their own. Mr. Speaker, every major project or business's development must go through this institution. And it's shocking to learn that they don't have monies to pay staff for this month, Mr. Speaker. Very shocking. This institution is very important to the newly discovered oil resources, with the upscale production in the Stabroek Block and many others to come. Guyana must guard against environmental hazards such as oil spill, flaring, and the dumping of toxic water into the ocean. These are 3 major issues that Guyanese should be concerned with, and the EPA should equip itself to manage these, Mr. Speaker. Let us turn our attention to the flaring. Mr. Speaker, Liza Phase 1 in 2021 flared over 1 billion cubic feet of gas, of a faulty compressor which they said was fixed, but flaring continues to no direct penalty, Mr. Speaker. We must understand that flaring releases over 250 identified toxic, including carcinogens such as the benzene, carbon disulfide, and toluene, metals such as mercury, Mr. Speaker, mercury, arsenic, and chromium, hydrogen sulfide. These are all toxic gases, Mr. Speaker. We learned that the US $10 million were paid to EPA, sir. This is a green light to flare. What we now have, Mr. Speaker, is a government, aka pay to pollute or no EIA government. That is what we have now, Mr. Speaker. That is what we have now. Demerara Harbor Bridge, no EIA required. The EPA published notice in the late 20s that the bridge would require an EIA, only to have it overturned by the politician in early 2021 against the EPA decision for an EIA to be done, Mr. Speaker. As soon as the coalition government was out of power, a close associate of the government cleared a huge plantation of mangrove forests at Hope. You were there, Mr. Camarade. With a no EIA, not even an application to the EPA. And they cut down the mangroves, Mr. Speaker. I recall, Mr. Speaker, senior government official making statements that to pollute Guyana is the cost to develop Guyana. This is callous and irresponsible, Mr. Speaker. They know themselves, Mr. Speaker. In this disregard for the law by the government, why are they losing these lawsuits, like the one just recently lost when they did not do an EIA for the radioactive storage on the east bank of Demerara, and shows clearly that the government values money over people's health, safety, and the environment. As I said, Mr. Speaker, this is a no EIA, pay to pollute government. Dumping of the toxic water waste into the ocean, Mr. Speaker. That is the same, that is, as I speak about the three important aspects, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the dumping of produced water is strictly prohibited in all parts of the world and prescribed by the World Bank. This had to do with highly toxic heavy metal, Mr. Speaker, radioactive materials, hot water 3 times more than the ocean water. This produced water also contains oil inside. And if we continue to dump this produced water with a rapid pace of oil production and development, then we will be dumping hundreds of thousands of barrels of pure oil in the ocean, Mr. Speaker. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, there was a popular video that was circulating by a fisherman that shows the oil was floating in the water, but that in terms that die. Mr. Speaker, the World Bank report says dumping of the produced water is prohibited unless it is not financially and technically feasible. But in this case, Mr. Speaker, it is easily feasible, both financially and technically, since normal international best practices call for it to be reinjected back into the reservoir with standard technology to maintain reservoir pressure, Mr. Speaker. But Guyana, they are injecting clean waters from the ocean while dumping the toxic into the water. How could that make a godly sense, Mr. Speaker? Except if it's only for greed and putting money above people's health and the environment, Mr. Speaker. Only the no EIA, pay to pollute PPC government would allow this, Mr. Speaker. After the election, they brought a highly controversial consultant from Canada to expedite the issuing of the permit from the Payara project. The team, which was led by Ms. Redford and comprised of the EPA, GGMC, and the Department of Energy, unanimously arrived at the decision that there shall be no dumping of produced water nor flaring of gas. The team met with Exxon, so directed that they installed equipment to do so. However, the PPC government disregarded that decision and now allows the unlimited dumping of the produced toxic water and unlimited flaring of the toxic gases as long as they could pay for it. That's right. Pollute as much as you want, as long as you can pay for it. The pay to pollute government, Mr. Speaker. That is what we have. Mr. Speaker, there has been an outcry from the media and public for government to release the Alison Redford report. We now ask again, Mr. Speaker, where is the Alison Redford report and why are they hiding it, Mr. Speaker? The only conclusion could be that they do not want the public to know that they went against their own foreign consultant and government agencies, so the health and environment detriment of our people and the nation are supposed to be protecting. Show us the Alison Redford report, Mr. Speaker. Show us where it is. Oil spill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the rapid rate of development in the oil and gas sector, one has to prepare for any mishap that we see to other parts of the world. All the monies earned now can be gone in a split of a second, Mr. Speaker. In a split of a second. We further plunge the country into bankruptcy, more heavy debt than the current and future generation will pay heavy price for that. That is poverty, Mr. Speaker. Poverty.
You will need an extension, honourable member, to conclude.
Comrade Speaker, I move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to continue his presentation. Conclude his presentation, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Chief Whip. Honourable member, you may continue towards your conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Worldwide offshore production operation like Guyana shows a high likelihood of an oil spill occurring offshore. That such likelihood of a spill increases exponentially with the rapid increase of offshore production activities and the reckless conduct of Exxon, with approval from the government to produce a rate of 25% above the safe operating limit defined in the EIA, Mr. Speaker. That is what they are doing, 25% above the limit, putting the country at a high risk for a spill. And sir, if you look at the emergency response and clean up of the British Petroleum in Macondo oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico have cost them $145 billion. I'm coming down to the figure just now, Mr. Speaker. $145 billion US. The government is now talking about bringing able to see oil spill remotely, when more importantly, we should have had 24/7 on board oversight to prevent the spill. It is useless and too late when you see the spill, Mr. Speaker. We call on the government to implement the World Bank 36-member program of highly personnel to provide the capacity to prevent the spill in the first place by on-site rigorous oversight, Mr. Speaker. Full coverage liability insurance, Mr. Speaker. This is where the issue is, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the topic seems to be a secret from Guyanese people at large. If by chance any of the disaster occurred that I previously mentioned here, Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean are doomed. And that is the doom, madam. That is the doom, honorable member. It will forever remain as it is. The coalition demanded and got Exxon to agree to have a full liability coverage to cover any size spill. Full liability coverage consists of an insurance plus the parent company guaranteeing, Mr. Speaker. It's a difference. It's a difference, Mr. Speaker. The parent company is running. Full liability coverage consists of insurance plus parent company guaranteeing that covers all costs above the insurance. It's simple formula, sir. Full coverage is equal to insurance plus parent company guaranteeing. That is what full coverage is, Mr. Speaker, not halfway. Mr. Speaker, that is what enshrined in the permits, and that is what is being negligibly allowed to be violated by this government. But like everything else, Mr. Speaker, it is the modus operandi of the government not to follow the rules of law. Like other civilized and democratic countries would do, sadly, we now live in an autocracy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in last year's debate, we heard some ministers saying that parent company guarantee was too costly. So, Mr. Speaker, please give me the honor to educate my honorable colleagues on the other side. A parent company guarantee costs nothing, nada. Nada, Mr. Speaker. It's just a document that is signed by the ExxonMobil, not the EEPGL, Mr. Speaker.
Nada, nada.
This language of full liability coverage, Mr. Speaker, which was created by the coalition, was put in the LISA 2 permit by the coalition and now copied by the PPC government and all other permits issued by the PPC. The VP himself verified this on the Glen National Mr. Program. If you remember, he went on his phone and he quoted the section, Mr. Speaker, with the language. However, the government is allowing Exxon to operate without this parent company guaranteeing. and with only $600 million in insurance, with the parent company guaranteeing that costs nothing, Mr. Speaker. $600 million is useless. Mr. Speaker, the Macondo spill I referred to earlier costs $145 billion US. So if you have a Macondo type spill here, who will cover the $144.4 billion? Who will cover it, Mr. Speaker? Above the $600 million insurance, which is merely 0.4% of that. That's just a typical example, Mr. Speaker. To put it another way, Mr. Speaker, the Macondo spill costed close to 250 times the $600 million that they were talking about here, Mr. Speaker. 250 times. And it's 50 times more of the entire budget here we're talking about, Mr. You can understand the devastation what can happen here. Mr. Speaker, therefore, there is a mystery still to anyone in this assembly as to why Guyana, many of its neighbors, would be financially bankrupt with the destruction of our fishing industry, tourism, and ecology. Mr. Speaker, I am not making this up. It is all in the EIAs. It will wipe out the Caribbean, tourism, and many others. Further, Mr. Speaker, even though the guarantee is zero cost, the government is now appeasing EEPGL. We're talking about cutting the legal requirements full, unlimited guarantee of $2 billion. $2 billion, Mr. Speaker. Again, who will cover the $143 billion US if we to have the Macondo spill here? Above the insurance amount with a parent company guaranteeing of only $2 billion. Mr. Speaker, let me ask my learned colleagues on the other side, since I know that they all have some common sense. Here's my simple question, Mr. Speaker. Why won't Exxon want to sign a legal required guarantee that costs nothing, especially since the pledge that they will never walk away from any such responsibility? Well, Mr. Speaker, a simple question brings a simple answer. And the first simple answer is that the fact that because they are being allowed to get away with the lawlessness and the callousness by our reckless government that doesn't respect our own laws. But the real reason, Mr. Speaker, is that Exxon would have no liability above $600 million insurance. Our walk away would get costly. Think about it, Mr. Speaker. How else would this be explained if the pledge that they wouldn't walk away? Why can't they put the pledge in the writing if it costs nothing, Mr. Speaker? Why can't they do that? Mr. Speaker, now my time is running out. And I am going. Mr. Speaker, let me talk about the gas ashore project, Mr. Speaker.
Unfortunately, we are already a minute over the extension.
Mr. Speaker, permit me to conclude, Mr. Speaker. Permit me to conclude, Mr. Speaker. My expectation that I wanted to see for the development of our environmental in Guyana, Mr. Speaker. Implement the World Bank plan that I spoke about, providing for the 36-member unit a highly specialized oil and gas unit, and the EPA, the rovers oversight and monitoring, including 24/7 on the ship presence, Mr. Speaker. The talk about now being able to oil spill remotely, Mr. Speaker, when more importantly we should have 24/7 on board oversight to prevent spill. It's too late when you see the spill, Mr. Speaker. It's too late. It is better you do it before. Preventative is always better than... Mr. Speaker, I know my time is up, and I really wish I could have continued in this regard. But, Mr. Speaker, I've spoke so much about the environmental issues that we have in Guyana here, and they were not mentioned in the budget, and therefore is unable to me to support such a budget that does not have the input for this very important agency and institute in Guyana, Mr. Speaker. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member.